Palestinians return to pray as Israel removes security barriers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in occupied East Jerusalem. The days of violence force Israel to back down. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Ali Mustafa and this is Strait Talk. Israel has backed down after days of tension at one of Islam's holiest sites. It happened after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government installed security cameras and metal detectors at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in occupied East Jerusalem. 2 Israeli police officers and 3 Arab Israelis were killed there earlier this month. Israel said the security measures were meant to safeguard against violence, but the Palestinians saw it as an affront to a religious site. The incident and reaction has once again raised questions over who has ultimate control over the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. And despite Israel ultimately removing the metal detectors and other barriers, the situation has renewed Palestinian suspicions about Israel's intentions. And to get the latest from on the ground, we're joined by Strait Talk correspondent Courtney Keeley from Jerusalem. Courtney, good to see you there. You've been on the ground for a few days now, and this entire episode has been unfolding for about a few weeks now. What is the sense that you get from the Palestinians and the Israelis on the ground?
Well, Ali, what I really get is a sense of resignation. There was a brief moment of victory, a brief moment of celebration on the Palestinian side when those security measures were taken down by the Israelis that were put up in recent weeks. Now, those security measures were just put up by Al-Aqsa compound, and the question was, did the Israeli government have the authority to do that? And it's the Islamic Waqf, the Jordanian government, that oversees it, so clearly those were taken down. But we're back to resignation. There's been violence on both sides, deaths on both sides, and it's just this sort of uptick in violence, and then it calms down, but the situation remains. It's not solved. It seems like an age-old conflict. Palestinians in occupied East Jerusalem claimed victory after nearly 2 weeks of mainly peaceful protests, refusing to pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque until the Israeli government took down newly erected metal barricades and surveillance cameras. Security checks were not the problem. The disruption of the delicate status quo was. Israel has no jurisdiction over the Al-Aqsa compound.
The Temple Mount is open to Muslims, to tourists and to Jewish visitors in the morning, and the security presence will continue over the next 24 to 48 hours.
After Israel captured and annexed East Jerusalem, including its holy sites in 1967, in a move that has never been internationally recognized, Israel allowed the Waqf, an Islamic trust overseen by Jordan, to remain in charge of day-to-day affairs inside the holy compound. The metal barricades and cameras were seen by many as a move by Israel to seize control of one of Islam's holiest sites in the world, as well as another humiliating checkpoint for Palestinians to endure.
فجميعنا يتابع المخططات الإسرائيلية الحثيثة منذ سنوات طوال لتهويد القدس الشرقية.
After the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem and the head of the Waqf Council announced that Israel had conceded, prayers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque were allowed to be attended by the Muslim faithful again.
الاحتلال الإسرائيلي غاشم حاول بأن يكسر إرادة هذا الشعب الفلسطيني أبناء القدس بشكل خاص.
In recent days, despite the grassroots peaceful protests, clashes had continued, but some clashes turned violent as Israeli soldiers used tear gas, stun grenades, and lightly coated metal bullets to disperse the crowds. But after 2 weeks, it didn't end in peaceful prayers, and the rare and fleeting victory for the Palestinians looks gone as they continue to live under Israeli occupation.
Courtney, as we saw in that report, a lot has happened, but is the Israeli side and the Israeli government telling us why they decided to remove the security barriers after so much has gone down?
Well, what you have is Prime Minister Netanyahu is in his conservative party, the Likud party, and the cabinet decided to put those barriers in. Then you had behind-the-scenes diplomacy, phone calls with King Abdullah II of Jordan, as well as other leaders, calls from Muslim leaders around the world saying that Israel had overstepped its reach. Now, those metal detectors came down quietly, as did those cameras, over a series of days, trying to keep it very quiet, and the Israeli government isn't really talking about it. What did happen early on was when the cabinet decided to put them up, apparently Shin Bet and the Israeli police didn't advise Prime Minister Netanyahu to do that because they thought it would incite violence, it would incite tensions and protests, which it did. Then they brought them down, and there's really no talk from the Israeli government. You can tell they just want the tensions to be quelled, and there's not a lot of talk about it. It's just done, but we're still seeing protests, and we're seeing the Palestinians who had that brief moment of victory. Also, the security situation remains in East Jerusalem, and the Israeli security really is in charge. They're not in charge of Al-Aqsa Mosque, but they're in charge of everything around it.
And this can be construed as a symbolic victory of sorts for the Palestinian resistance to get the barriers off the compound, but the occupation still continues, doesn't it?
Well, I think what you really have to recognize what happened over the weeks was that the Palestinians were not listening to Fatah or any political group. It was a grassroots movement where they decided to listen to the religious authorities, and they decided not to enter the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but to peacefully pray outside the compound, outside in the streets, outside the gates of the old city. And that was something we really haven't seen. It was pretty remarkable, and it wasn't driven by any political faction. We'll see if that grassroots movement gets any more traction after this. Now that the Mufti and the Al-Aqsa authorities have said come back to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, it seems like that situation for now has been re-established, that Israel and Israel's government does not have authority over the Al-Aqsa Mosque, even though it's still a religious site for them with the Temple Mount. It's still with sovereignty according to Jordanian's administration.
Courtney Keeley, thank you very much. Continue the good work. Courtney Keeley joining us from Jerusalem. Still to come on Strait Talk. Was it a case of gross miscalculation or acceptable damage? We look at the blowback from Israel's security measures at the Al-Aqsa compound. And with decades of friendship between Turkey and the Palestinians, how is Ankara viewing the Al-Aqsa crisis? We speak to a former Turkish ambassador to Israel for an inside take. Tensions at Al-Aqsa are nothing new. It's been a powder keg since Israel invaded East Jerusalem back in 1967. And for decades since, incidents that seemed minor at first blew up into a major crisis, like the one we saw this past week. But was there something different this time around? Did Israel anticipate the blowback? Aisha Jamal explains.
It was a day of rage that spiraled out of control. Anger triggered by Israel's security measures at Islam's third holiest site, the Al-Aqsa compound in occupied East Jerusalem. The tightened security came after the killing of 2 Israeli policemen near the site on July 14th. Israel installed security cameras and metal detectors, a move that disrupted a delicate status quo, Muslim control and accessibility to the Al-Aqsa compound. Israel says the restrictions are for the sake of security, and they have since partially backed down. Is this a sign that they miscalculated? The Al-Aqsa Mosque has been a flashpoint for decades, and no one knows this better than Israel. In 1990, a fringe right-wing group, the Temple Mount Faithful, made a provocative declaration that they would lay a cornerstone for a new temple at the site. That led to riots and nearly 24 Palestinians being killed. On its website, the group calls for the destruction of Al-Aqsa Mosque in order to build the temple on top of its ruins. In 2000, before Ariel Sharon became prime minister, he entered the site with 1,000 soldiers by his side. That move sparked the Second Intifada, which left thousands dead in just 5 years. And with the expansion of Israeli settlements on occupied Palestinian land in recent years, tensions around Al-Aqsa have increased. The global condemnation has also been swift. Under international law, Israel has no jurisdiction over the compound, which it disputes. They call the site Temple Mount. An Islamic Waqf or trust controlled by Jordan and Palestinians administers the mosque. For Palestinians, the status of Al-Aqsa is non-negotiable. And for the Muslim world,
Jerusalem is a red line.
This frequent show of force raises Palestinian concerns that Israel is trying to take the site for itself. Israel's own security services warned against provoking tensions around Al-Aqsa, but the government ignored those warnings. So did Israel miscalculate the blowback, or was it an acceptable cost?
And joining me now from Jerusalem is Alon Liel, who is a former Director General at Israel's Foreign Ministry. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Liel. Did Israel anticipate the blowback to its security measures, given the sensitivities around Al-Aqsa?
Some of the system anticipated it and was against the measures, but the Prime Minister, as you know, decided 2 weeks ago to install this equipment, and the rest is history. And I think the fact that Israel reversed the measures proves that it was impossible to go on with the technical measures that were installed.
So why was this decision made in the first place by the Israeli government?
First of all, the attack 2 weeks ago on the mountain near Al-Aqsa was very traumatic to the Israeli public, because it was 3 Israeli Arabs killing 2 Israeli security people who are also who were Druze, who are not Jewish, and it was the earth was shaking, and the public response was kind of never again. This will not happen to us again, and this created the pressure on the government to come up with a technical solution that will not enable such an attack ever again, and this led to the decision. Some of the security system in Israel was against it, including the army, but the police was in favor, and it was decided to do it. But when you look back, 2 weeks back, this created a chain of events that we didn't have for a very long period of time. Although we don't have a peace process in the background for almost 4 years, we didn't really have the earth shaking internationally. And these 2 weeks reminded us how sensitive the conflict still is inside the region and internationally.
It's been 50 years since Israel started occupying East Jerusalem after the Six-Day War in 1967. Do you think the Israeli government's inability to restart the peace process is worsening the situation on the ground?
If you look back, since the talks collapsed almost 4 years ago, the talks that the Americans handled, it was expected that the international problems of Israel will grow, that the pressure on Israel will grow. But it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Look at this year, 2017, Netanyahu enjoyed maybe unprecedented international support from President Trump and his administration. Europe lowered the involvement very much, knowing that Trump is so supportive of Israel. Asia is not putting pressure. Africa hosted Netanyahu, and he was very proud that although the occupation is 50 years old, with no peace process in the background, he is such a mega celeb internationally. So the last 2 weeks, this U-turn of the last 2 weeks is a sharp reminder that things are much deeper and cannot be shoved under the carpet.
Alon Liel, thank you for joining us from Jerusalem. A strong reaction from Turkey over developments at Al-Aqsa has taken Ankara's relations with Tel Aviv to a new low. Turkey's President Erdogan was one of the first leaders to condemn Israeli actions at Al-Aqsa. It didn't go down well with the Israelis, and for ordinary Turks, anger reached fever pitch, as Omar Kablan reports.
Anger against Israel spilling out onto the streets in Istanbul after Friday prayers. It's over Israeli actions at the Al-Aqsa compound, the third holiest in Islam. The protesters call for an end to the occupation of Palestinian land.
Onların yıllardan beri süren sınır tanımaz, yasa tanımaz tavırları yüzünden son dönemlerde de iyice azarak bu bölgeleri işgal ettiklerini düşünüyorum.
Sadece Müslümanlar değil, Yahudisi de, Hristiyanı da ve batılı dinler de dahil olmak üzere ne yapması lazım? Oraya sahip çıkmaları lazım.
The angry chants on the streets is now being heard in corridors of power. Turkey has called Israeli security measures an attempt at another land grab.
Buradan tüm vatandaşlarıma ve dünyadaki tüm Müslümanlara bir çağrıda bulunmak istiyorum. İmkanı olan herkes, bulduğu her fırsatta lütfen Kudüs'ü, Mescid-i Aksa'yı ziyaret etsin.
Erdogan's statement has led to a war of words between Israel and Turkey. Israel's foreign ministry responded on Twitter, calling Erdogan's Al-Aqsa plea absurd. It went on as Turkey's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said Israel should heed common sense. Following Turkey's statement, Israel's foreign ministry then deleted its tweets. To get a deeper understanding of Turkey's relation with Israel, I went to Istanbul's Fatih district to meet an international human rights lawyer, Gülden Sönmez.
Filistin meselesi Türkiye'nin solcu, liberal, milliyetçi, İslamcı, Kürt, Türk, Alevi, Sünni hemen aklınıza gelebilecek bütün Türkiye'lileri ilgilendiren ortaklaştığı bir mesele.
For Palestinians, Turkey is an all-weather ally, and statements by President Erdogan calling for the respect of Muslims at Al-Aqsa is a testament to that solidarity. The Turkish people have also never wavered in supporting Palestinians in their decades-long struggle. Omar Kablan, Strait Talk.
And for more on the Turkish reaction, I'm joined by Uz Çelikol, the former Turkish ambassador to Israel. Ambassador Çelikol, thank you for joining us. Now, you were the ambassador to Israel at a very critical time when the Mavi Marmara incident happened. How does that incident compare to the relationship between Israel and Turkey today?
Well, you know, of course, the Turkish government sees the last crisis in the Mescid Al-Aqsa as a freedom of faith and freedom of religion and freedom of worship. It is very good, of course, things are moving on the right direction and the Israeli government is removing obstacles. This is, of course, very important for not only for Turkey but whole Islamic world. All the people from in the Islamic countries are following very closely what is happening in the Mescid Al-Aqsa, but unfortunately this was not the first crisis we have been witnessed there. As you remember, second Intifada also started when one of the former Prime Minister of Israel visited Masjid Al-Aqsa, Haram al-Sharif compound.
Ambassador, Turkey has supported groups such as Hamas, which Israel considers as terrorist organizations. Tell us how Turkey's support for groups like Hamas fits into the larger Israeli-Turkish dialogue.
Well, of course, Turkey supports the Palestinian people as an entity. It has good relations with the Palestinian Authority also, and it has also some, dialogue with Hamas. But the Turkish government's position, Turkey's position, has always been supporting the two-state solution from the beginning. A state, a Palestinian state, which will live side by side Israel. But unfortunately, of course, in recent years, you refer to the Marmara incident at the beginning of our conversation. Of course, there is a problem between Turkish government and the Israeli government, current Israeli government, because Israel is moving away from the two-state solution. And when you move away from the two-state solution, how you are going to solve the Palestinian problem? The occupation of West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem is continuing for more than 50 years. And the Palestinians and the Israelis are negotiating for a long time, since the Oslo Agreement. But unfortunately, recently what we have been witnessing, the problem of moving away from two-state solution. That is the cause of the problem, and Turkey has always supported a Palestinian state which will live in peace, in harmony with Israel.
Ambassador Uz Chelikol, thank you for joining us on Strait Talk.
أنا هلا زلمة كبير، يعني إلي شهرين بلشت في 96. في أواخر 46 مناحم بيغن جاب قوات إسرائيلية مع ألغام وضعها في الكنديبت ونسف الكنديبت. لما بلشت الإنجليز يغادروا البلد صارت اليهود في مناوشات بيننا وبين اليهود. بهذاك الوقت بلشت الحرب اللي هي حرب 48 في الأمباسادور في القدس. أنا لما كنت أشتغل وصار الحرب فجأة، أجيت أنا من القدس على البيت هون، على البيت تبعي اللي أنتم دخلتوا فيه. أجوا اليهود جابوا سيارات كبيرة لإيجد، قالوا أي واحد من البلد بيحب يروح بنوصله إحنا لحدود الأردن. طبعاً أنا كنت موجود هناك، عدد كبير من الناس قالوا لا يمكن نغادر. أصله هي كانت يعني بعكس ما بدهم الفلسطينيين، يعني صارت حاجة ما كانش لازم تصير. المستقبل بتمنى بس شيء واحد من الله، إن نخلص من الاحتلال ونحافظ على ديننا وعلى عروبتنا وعلى فلسطين اللي تضل زينا زي باقي الدول. عندنا بلدنا، عندنا مساجدنا.
If you saw our show today, you might have noticed that all our guests were men of a certain age who've witnessed the Israeli-Palestinian conflict through a certain lens. But today, a new generation is doing things differently. They're taking the struggle to a whole new space online. It's a place where the message is pushed using hashtags, GIFs, and memes, all liked and shared many times over. The Intifada has gone viral. What do I mean by that? Well, young people are spreading the call to resistance using their weapon of choice. Resisting an occupation is now as easy as sharing a picture And crucially, it's also about organizing a movement like BDS. The BDS, or Boycott, Divest and Sanction movement, calls for a boycott of products from Israeli settlements. And with the help of a hashtag, a mere 3 letters can spread globally, calling for coordinated action. So, if one side is getting more traction, more shares, more likes, does that mean that side is winning? Is history on their side? Tell us what you think. We'll share your comments next time. And that's all for this edition of Strait Talk with me, Ali Mustafa. Until next time, hoşça kalın and goodbye.